managed to do some networking and share with my friends. We will continue with the session today. Before that, let me just introduce another 4 panelists that are with me today. Starting from my left, of course you have no relevant of the time. Beside him is Dr. Yao Teng Wat, who is currently a lecturer of Church History and Theology at the Trinity Theological College, and he is also part of the technical presenter of the BBS program. And on my left here is Dr. Andrew Bay, who is an ordained minister of the Chinese Annual Conference of the Methodist Church in Singapore, and also part of the technical presenters for the BBS program. On my right, beside Ustaz Hanan, who we have already created with, is Ustaz Muhammad Murad bin Muhammad Aris, and he is currently the Executive Director of Madrasah Al-Junaid Al-Islamiyah and also Director of Religious Affairs at the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. And on my extreme right, that makes me the most moderate there because the extreme right is Ustaz Alfian Yasir Ucid, who is the President of the Sharia Court, which is the Muslim Family Law Tribunal, which derives statutory powers from the administration of Muslim law. So a round of applause there. We have heard the 2 paper presenters earlier this morning, and we are very happy to have with us here Dr. Poon Chang Yao, who is currently an assistant professor of Asian Studies at the Singapore Management University, and he's seated here on my right. Dr. Poon does research on a variety of issues, including religion, multiculturalism, and also running modules on Asian identities, and a whole host of other issues pertaining to religion and society. He's also a friend of the Young Center and has participated in many of the programs. And he will be the commentator today to discuss and give other perspectives that has not been touched, or perhaps to expand some of the points from the 2 papers that has been delivered this morning. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Poon to present his commentary. Round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank MUIS and NCCS for their invitation to be academic commentator of such a significant event. I'm much honored to be able to participate in this seminar, which brings together people of all faith, which is truly Singaporean and truly diverse. I've read all the papers presented in the past 3 engagement sessions in 2012, and I must say I'm truly humbled and enlightened by the prodigious knowledge and wisdom imparted by respected Muslim and Christian theologians. I must admit that I'm neither a theologian nor a philosopher, although I've always wanted to be a student of these disciplines. I come as a social scientist who have keenly observed and studied various aspects of religion, including relations between religion and society, interfaith dialogue, and various expressions of religious identities, especially in Indonesia. I've done a lot of field work in Indonesia, where I studied Christian schools, Christian seminaries, religious education, Chinese churches, and interfaith activities. So I hope my experience as an outsider can bring to the table a different perspective, which will be useful for the discourse under discussion. In accordance to the conventions of interfaith engagement, I wish to first acknowledge at the outset that I'm speaking in my own capacity, not representing any religious or educational institution. I will, however, make disproportionately more reference in my speech to Christianity than to Islam, because I'm a Christian myself and I'm not a Muslim, and my knowledge of Islam is, at best, informed by books that I read and by Muslims who I interacted with. While drawing examples on Christianity, I may unwittingly indulge in critical reflection more so than if I'm speaking about other religions. Being provocative does not, in any way, reflect meaning that I do not have a high regard for the religion or the religious institution. It does, however, reflect the deep reflexivity that I hope to exercise as a critical scholar, as well as an individual that does not want to take his faith for granted. I'm going to address three themes in this commentary. There are three parts to this paper. The first part is on tradition, which I want to throw in a question that asks how traditional are traditions. The second part is on deconstructing postmodernism, and the final part is on in the postmodern world, but not of it. Let me start with traditions. The theme of today's seminar is religious traditions and authority in the postmodern world. So far, most papers have problematized the later half of the theme, which is the postmodern world, and assume that religious tradition and authority are a priori unproblematic, stable, unchanging, coherent, and maybe some people even assume that religious traditions and authority are something mandated from heaven. I want to interrogate this notion of religious tradition and authority using concepts of identity politics and using Eric Hobsbawm's notion of invented tradition. Ustad Hanan, in his paper for the first session, acknowledged the possibility that traditions can be invented. He referred to Eric Hobsbawm's notion of invented tradition, in which Hobsbawm argues. Hobsbawm believes that traditions, which we often assume to be ancient, unalterable, and deeply important, may actually sometimes be much less natural than presumed. Traditions may also be changed to suit the needs of the day, and then changes can come and can become accepted as part of the ancient tradition. Often these inventions were based in some form of tradition, but were grossly exaggerated, distorted, or biased towards a particular interpretation. Indeed, we see traditions being invented all the time. Let me give an example. I teach Asian studies, so when we reflect on Asia in the 1980s and 1990s, the Asian values argument, which sets a set of values and championed by Asian leaders to be uniquely Asian, and these set of values were attributed to the driving force of Asian economic growth. But just how traditional are these values? They claim to be Confucian, but I doubt that Confucius himself would recognize such neo-Confucius values. So these are invented traditions. Post-colonial states, with very short history, needed to invent traditions in order to create the myth of the nation, so that unrelated and diverse people could unite together and imagine themselves as a community. So in that sense, invented traditions is very real, and we do it all the time. Now, Ustad Hanan has rightly pointed out that the real concern is not whether certain traditions are real or invented, but who has the authority to legitimize such practices and behavior as legitimate tradition. But this has to do with the power to define. Whereas religious traditions may be less concerned about whether certain practices are true or heavily mandated, but more about who has the power to define and to establish these practices as the practices or as the religious traditions. For example, within the Catholic tradition, authority of teaching is vital importance. Father Gareth Moore writes, and I quote, "In religion, what is said and done is not to be in conformity with what is established by impartial inquiry, by going and looking at how things are, by experimenting. Rather, it is to be conformable to what is authoritatively said." So in that sense, authority is important rather than how that tradition is validated. In other words, within the Catholic tradition, what is true and what is held authoritatively, or what is true is what is held authoritatively within the tradition. Truth, in other words, is based on coherence with other statements within the Catholic form of life and on what leaders of the Church lay down as orthodoxy. What is false is what is held as false by those who lead the tradition. And this resonates with what Dr. Lia presented in the first session, where he described the role of tradition in the early church when it was plagued by a variety of challenges, including persecution by ruling authority, attacks from pagan writers, and the rise of heresies within its own community. Religious traditions in the forms of creeds were then established to define the boundary between us and them, self and other, Christians and pagans, persecuted and persecutor, and between where orthodoxy ends and heresy begins. In other words, religious traditions serve a functional purpose of defining one's identity against the other. Religious traditions are then not mandates received from God, but social constructs that serve a practical and significant purpose, which depended on who had the power to define at that particular time and circumstance. Then to absolutize religious traditions as truth is thus something very dangerous, as those who are perceived as dangerous as those who perceive to relativize the truth. British theologian Peter Vardy argues that, quote, when a single text is given absolute status, the door is readily open for fundamentalism to emerge, because such people will not need to seek for truth. They are sure that they have already found it. And this can be very dangerous. Vardy argues that the real truth is likely to be found among those who agonize and doubt, who search and seek, and who may be in confusion. But it is unlikely to be found in the religious fundamentalists who are so sure of what they know. Not only such people have not done any really serious philosophical thinking, not only their claims are based on the thinnest ground, but more than this, they are dangerous because they are satisfied that they impose their satisfaction on others on the flimsiest of grounds. As such, I agree with Ustad Alfian. I think Ustad Alfian has been incredibly honest in his paper when he wrote that, I quote, when I accepted that it is important to transmit and pass down what we do know in our religious tradition and authority, I think it is ultimately more interesting to tell youths that what we cannot know and what we do not know. End quote. Dr. Lear lamented on the fact that religious traditions have lost relevance to a large extent in Singapore churches, and again, this is a very honest evaluation. I share some of his concern, as I, for one, thoroughly enjoy going to a traditional church, tradition with quotation mark, church service with full liturgy. However, as I reflect, I ask myself just how traditional such traditional services are. This can be questionable. Did the apostle in the early church sit down in wooden pews in a Gothic building and sing hymns composed in the 17th and 18th century accompanied by the pipe organ? Did they dress in preaching gown, which inspires our academic gown nowadays? Did Jesus say the Apostle Creed? Did he believe in Calvinist Reformed theology? Just how traditional are these traditions? Traditions, like culture, is ever-changing. Dr. Lear acknowledges this, in fact, as he maps the cartography of Christian traditions up until the Reformation and beyond in his paper. Ustad Hanan also appreciates this fact in his paper, where he said that even if a certain tradition had not been created in the remote past, it soon becomes a past practice of belief that finds its currency. Today's contemporary practice may become tomorrow's tradition. I do not want to trivialize the importance of traditions, as I see a lot of value in them, but yet I'm wary of how traditions risk to be essentialized, romanticized, religionized, and even politicized. But the passing on of traditions has to be organic. The changing nature of traditions has to be acknowledged, and the relevance of traditions has to be maintained so that traditions can continue to give meaning and continue to inform the current generation. The second part of my paper is on deconstructing the postmodern. In the second session of engagement, both Dr. Andrew Peh and Ustad Muhammad Murad have acknowledged the difficulty in defining what postmodernism entails. Some define postmodernity as a period after modernity, which encompasses globalization, internet age, and consumerism. Arguably, we are all living in a postmodern world today, but then we have to be careful to understand about the access to such phenomenon may not be equal across the board. For example, some parts of the world are yet to experience modernity, let alone post-modernity. In that sense, modernity and post-modernity reflect a very Western-centric notion of progress. And I'm not sure whether we can sort of import it wholesale in our context across Asia. Postmodernism describes the adoption of certain philosophy which rejects the tenets of modernism, including meta-narratives, grand theory, essentialism, and objective truth that fails to take into account that reality is cognitively or socially constructed. Such ideas have led to accusations that postmodernism implies a degree of relativity that renders any kind of authoritative statements impossible. It should be emphasized, though, that the question of relativity is a controversial one even within postmodernism. Few postmodernists, for example, have pushed relativism to virtual nihilism and to an abandonment of morality. While one may try to deconstruct postmodernism, which in itself may prove to be futile because postmodernism has not established a singular definition for itself, one should be careful not to reduce and conflate postmodernism with relativism, or else one risks essentializing postmodernism. Postmodernism is particularly critical of the Western European cultural imposition, which is heavily based on a male, patriarchal, science and reason-based construction of reality. Being critical of these does not mean to be dismissive. It means that knowledge established through such lenses are at best partial, that there are other stories untold and unheard of. For example, history, as formulated within the Western tradition, imposes order on the past to make sense of it. It is never objective, even if it claims itself to be subject to rigorous scientific validation. The word history itself, starting with his, has been patriarchal. It was seen from the lenses of men, and women have been rendered either voiceless or insignificant. So are the voices of the subaltern, marginalized, slaved, harlot, and colonized. In this sense, the pluralism of voices and the self-reflexive position that postmodernism introduced to the social sciences are valuable. Just like any other positions, even within religion, where there can be different spectrums of extremes, from people who are totally fundamentalists to being totally liberal. There is a spectrum of different positions within postmodernism. I suspect the four characteristics, autonomous individualism, narcissistic hedonism, reductive naturalism, and moral relativism, cited by Dr. Pei from Thomas Orden, represent the more radical and extreme form of postmodernism. Sometimes we tend to hold on to the text and to one singular interpretation of the text too tightly. That there is the beauty of what has not been interpreted and what has not been said in the text. Theology, a discipline that I highly respect, unfortunately sometimes tries to say too much, leaving too little room for the mystical experience with the ultimate truth, the absolute one. I remember last year I hosted Professor Farid Isaac at SMU for a week, and we were walking towards the lobby board, translation, and the traffic light in front of Orchard Road Presbyterian Church, where there's a huge poster. I asked him whether he remembered that he told me 10 years ago when he was in Australia, he told me that when he gives a speech, if he has his speech in front of him, if he's holding onto the text, he tends to deliver a very boring, predictable, and uncreative, unnatural speech. So sometimes he purposely put the speech away so that he can liberate himself to speak and not be imprisoned by the text. And he told me at the junction of Orchard Road Presbyterian Church in Oakland that the same goes to religious texts. Sometimes you need to let go in order to fully live and appreciate it. Those who hang on to the text only show his or her insecurity. This is manifest among many fundamentalists. Dr. Pei, in his paper, argues that postmodernism's denial of meta-narrative stands in stark contradiction against historic Christianity. I have to respectfully disagree with him. Although I'm not a theologian, in my own reading of the life of Jesus, he has frequently challenged and denied many meta-narratives that the Jews have established. It was radical, and it was a rebel to challenge traditions and authority, and destabilize the very comfort that these traditions provide. I'm not sure what methods and narratives that historic Christianity has kept and maintained that seems so vulnerable to the challenge of postmodernism.